So continuing the chapter, while the fan calms down. I mentioned there's 4 clinical trial levels. Works a little bit differently with vaccines because typically you have a group of people with a condition that you're going to treat. With vaccines, you have a group of people whose condition you're trying to prevent. So that does make this a little bit trickier, but similar. Phase 1. Phase 1 is done with a small group of healthy people. And it is basically, okay, this worked okay in the animals. What's it going to do in people that could be bad? Some things wind up being toxic in people that are not toxic in mice. And so you take a small group of people and you give them usually a little bit more dosage than you're expecting to give people in your treatment group, and you look for toxic events and nasty side effects. But it's a small group, so you're only going to get nasty side effects that are pretty common. And of course, toxicity, you definitely want to know if this is going to make people really sick, if you're going to kill somebody. And of course, if you do, that's it. You're not going to phase 2. So you send your data into the FDA, they look it over and go, okay, go on to phase 2. Phase 2, again, is a smaller group. And for this, you're looking at a group of people who have the condition that you're looking at. Sometimes this is done with a control group. Sometimes it's not done with a control group. And again, you're looking for more for bad stuff than for good stuff. You are looking for therapeutic effects of your drug, whether it's actually helping the people that you're treating. But it's one thing to put it into healthy people, it's another thing to put it into sick people. So you're looking for effects. And a lot of times when you see press releases and news reports, it's on phase 2 where somebody's had really good results against the condition. There's a problem with phase 2 though, and that you get something called selection bias. You only need, if I'm the researcher, I only need a small group of people. I need people with the condition that I'm treating. And ideally, and there's only a small group so I can select for this, ideally, they don't have anything else. They don't have any other conditions, they're not taking any other kinds of drugs. And so it's a more pure study of what my particular drug does to that particular condition, but it doesn't really mimic the wide world where people do have other conditions and they may be on other chemicals that are going to interact one way or another with the drug. So it's not unusual to get better results in phase 2 on average than you're going to get on phase 3 when you have to expand to a much larger group of people. And you're going to have to include people with other conditions and people taking other kind of chemicals. And what you get from phase 2 to phase 3 is what they often call regression to the mean. Is your average good effect in phase 2 isn't the real average. The real average is going to be less because there's going to be interactions that are going to bring your effects down. And so you're going to regress to the true average in phase 3. Phase 3 is typically done with a very large group, as large as you can manage it. And you're going to have case control. You're going to have randomized people to a study group with the disease and a control group with the disease. They're getting a placebo treatment. They're not supposed to know if they're in, which group they're in. The people administering the treatment's not supposed to know what group people are in, double blind. And this is where you're looking for legitimate effects of your drug on the condition and side effects, hopefully fairly rare side effects. Right now, there's issues with the vaccines potentially being associated with blood clots, but it looks like the numbers they're getting, it might be as much as a 1 in 100,000 risk, which even though the original phase 3 studies were upwards of 30,000 people, you're not going to necessarily get a 1 in 1,000 risk show up in 30,000 people. And if you get one case, you don't necessarily even know if you're looking at a legitimate side effect. And that's part of what happens. If you have something bad happens, now you have to decide, because in the group that's that big, bad stuff's going to happen. Somebody falls out of a tree. Was that related to our chemical, to our drug? Well, we have to look. Maybe there was a dizziness side effect in that. That's why they lost their balance and fell. Even somebody getting hit by a car, was their judgment impaired as a side effect of the drug? Or you can legitimately go, no, this had nothing to do with the drug. This is what happened early on with some of the vaccines, where they stopped stuff and the drug company looked and went, yeah, they had this stroke, but they had a family history of this anyway. So we're pretty confident in saying it's not related to the vaccine. Phase 3, if all goes well and everything looks great and it performs better than what's out there, because that's part of what you're doing too, is that sometimes you're treating a condition that already has treatments, and so now you have to better the treatments that are available. It works quicker, it works with fewer side effects, it's legitimately going to be significantly cheaper. It's easier to administer. You can give somebody a pill once a week instead of 3 times a day. But you need some sort of significant improvement over what's out there in order to get cleared for sale. A lot of times what happens is the drug companies will take something they have a patent on and they'll play with it a little bit, convince the regulators that it is a significant change, and go through the system again. And now they've got a patent for the new version, which they're going to market as, and it's going to be probably more expensive because it does something fancier. But sometimes that will keep the generics from going onto the market as in competition. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but I've seen it happen. Now, phase 4 is an official phase for pediatric treatments. If you're going to give stuff to kids, once it's out and being prescribed, you need to keep track of the effects that it has. Is that there's a reporting system for pediatricians that are going to prescribe pediatric drugs. Otherwise, phase 4 is somewhat unofficial, where if somebody notices something weird happens after they've given them a drug that's on the market, they don't have to report it. They might report it. Who they report it to isn't always that clear. A lot of times phase 4 issues come up from conferences. You get a bunch of doctors working in the same field together and they start talking about weird events. They start to realize, wow, we've all seen unexplained strokes happen in our patients that we put on this new drug. Maybe we need to alert somebody at the FDA. And then they'll send out a wider survey and see if this is actually happening. It happened with an arthritis drug a few years ago, where there turned out to be a decent number of strokes happening in people that had been put on the arthritis drug. When the FDA dug through the data, the raw data from the phase 3 trials, there were people that had gotten strokes, but the company had written it off as not related to the treatment. And so the FDA, they got a huge fine, and it was off the market for a while, and now it's back on the market. And now strokes is a side effect on the list of side effects. Incidentally, the list of side effects goes from most common to least common. I'm not sure what the floor is in terms of proportions for least common, but when you get that long, long list, is it starts with the stuff that happens most often when they ran the trials and works its way to things that happen very, very rarely. There's a group of conditions that are often called orphan conditions. There's government money to underwrite research for this. This is a condition that is not had by a huge mass of people. Now keep in mind, the drug companies are looking to sell to consumers. The consumers are going to be people with conditions. And if it's a condition that doesn't affect a lot of consumers, there may not be a financial incentive to come up with a treatment for it. So the financial incentive here is often government support for what's called orphan drugs. Drugs that on the market, there's only going to be maybe a few thousand people that are ever going to be, taking advantage of that particular drug. So there are programs for things. If somebody in your family has a condition that's pretty rare, if there are treatments for it, it may have gone through an orphan drug system. I want to talk a little bit about The drug companies are looking to make a profit, and they make a pretty decent profit. Is that there's a huge investment in research, as I said, something like 9 out of every 10 patented drugs never actually gets through phase 3 and out on the market. They hit different spots where things don't work, but they're still selling them at a significant uptick, especially when you see how they're sold in other countries. And a lot of it has to do with what insurance will cover. And there's a whole, it's a very, very complex system. The American health system is very complex. It's very expensive for a number of good reasons and bad reasons. Companies are interested in what are called blockbuster drugs. Drugs for a condition that that you don't necessarily cure, but you treat. And it's something that people will have for a lengthy period of time, so they'll have to keep buying your particular treatment for it. Certain skin conditions, certain digestive conditions, certain circulatory conditions. Diabetes, for instance, is something where you need to keep taking the drugs to control whatever it is you're controlling. Diabetes, incidentally, there's a type 1 and a type 2, but there's really about a dozen different variations that are just kind of lumped under type 2 diabetes. Antibiotics have become a big issue because bacteria are more and more developing resistances, right? Natural selection, selecting the bacterial pathogens that the marketed antibiotics don't affect. So you go, well, why don't the drug companies come up with new ones? Well, they realize that if they come up with a very effective new antibiotic, it's going to be treated as the antibiotic of last resort, which means somebody comes in with a bacterial infection. You don't give them super new antibiotic. You give them the stuff that you normally would give them. And if it doesn't work and doesn't work and doesn't work, this super antibiotic is at the end of the treatment queue, because you figure, okay, this will work, but we don't want to give it so much that the bacteria out in the world develop a resistance to this. So again, doesn't look like something that's going to make a lot of money. And it is a money-making operation. People go, well, the government should run it. If you look at how well the government runs things, there's an upside and a downside to that as well. People go, well, I'm going to take this alternative treatment. It's going to work on my condition and it has no side effects. That's what they told me. If it has no side effects, there's an excellent chance it has no effects. And the drug companies have been looking at these alternative treatments for decades, trying to find stuff that actually works, because they can extract the part of it that works and make a concoction that they can patent. So it's very, very unlikely that these alternative treatments are doing what they're supposed to do. It's a very, very remote chance. Some stuff that's weirder treatments, like homeopathy, where you dilute and dilute and dilute something, that goes back to a like treats like theory from 170 some years ago that never has worked particularly well and has no supportive evidence at all. Chiropractic is a little bit iffy. I mean, they're pretty good at working with the back, but a lot of the other stuff that they claim that they can do, there's virtually no evidence that they can treat conditions that aren't essentially physical therapy related. And there's some people like in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the regime in communist China got very, very paranoid, and a tremendous fraction of the educated citizens were eliminated, sent to re-education camps that they generally didn't survive. That included a tremendous number of doctors trained in Western medicine. But they had a whole bunch of citizens now, and the citizens get sick, they want treatment. The doctors had mostly been killed. And they didn't really want to train them for a while. You know, this paranoia was still existing, but they knew that if they didn't do something, they always live in fear of the people rising up against them. There's a lot of people. So they concocted this mishmash of folk remedies and other sorts of things that they kind of threw together and fiddled with and developed what people often call ancient Chinese medicine. Well, it's not ancient, it's just like 50-some years old. And they could train practitioners in this stuff really quickly, send them out, you know, you'd give them the herbal remedy, you'd grind stuff up, you'd stick needles in them. A lot of placebo effect. People thought that there was, you know, that they were being treated. Modern Chinese, educated Chinese do not generally partake of ancient Chinese medicine. I don't think anybody was more surprised than the government when this caught on outside of their borders and it became a commodity that they could actually export. But I would not rely too much on that stuff. And placebo effect is very strong. Is it, you know, the suggestion that it will work for a tremendous number of conditions that people get, placebo effect can have a pretty strong effect on it. Okay, that is it for the protein analysis chapter. We got one more chapter to go.